Welcome to another episode of On the Issues with Alon Ben-Meir. Today's guest is Jeta Abazi Gashi, an award-winning journalist from Kosovo and a Fulbright Visiting Scholar at the Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication at the George Washington University. In this episode, Alon and Jeta discuss the question of identity and belonging among Kosovar youth, especially given Kosovo's status as the youngest state in Europe, their views on nationalism and secularism, and Kosovo's relations with Europe and the United States.
Again, thank you so much for taking the time. As I mentioned to you earlier, I'm extremely interested and keen about what's happening, what's in Kosovo. And I'd like to focus our discussion today on the Kosovar youth, how they perceive themselves, how they see themselves in connection with Europe, what are if there's such a thing as general aspiration. And we take it from there, and we'll have that kind of discussion surrounding this issue. And what is the prospect for, they say, like 10, 15 years as to where, of course, that's going to depend largely on the political development in Kosovo itself, certainly in relation to Serbia, in relation to accession to Europe. But where do you see the youth is moving, especially now that there is also visa liberalization that just took place?
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm really happy to meet you in a virtual way, and I hope to meet you sometime in person as well.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So basically, maybe I can start currently with where I am. So I got this Fulbright scholarship at the Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication, which is within the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University. So I arrived now since 3 weeks. And I'll be researching the topic on the relation between the US and Kosovo, which would include also the youth. But if you mentioned the youth, I had this research where I explored the question of identities, because I'm very much interested on that question and the sense of belonging. And I wanted to focus on, I think it's interesting to be focused on a generation that has not experienced the war, because their perspectives are quite unique in terms of, yes, on one hand, they have inherited the legacy of their parents and the history, as well as the traumas are transmitted to them in different ways. But at that same time, and this was especially because Kosovo now, with the process of visa, things are moved to another direction. But at that time, the only way they visually could symbolize Europe was through social networks. So given that they were physically in Kosovo, in a very isolated country, the social networks have provided them kind of a window to symbolically see Europe. And the way they want to belong to Europe, my impression and my ambition was to explore that it is a bit different compared to the national leaders that were governing Kosovo just after the war, because their sense of belonging has shaped, has changed, has transformed. There are some similarities, but their prosperities and their horizon is very much focused on practical things rather than let's say political ideologies. Although they are visible, but they are worried about finding jobs. They are worried about, or not only worried, but they want to find jobs. They want to find scholarships. For example, if before in the sense of identification, it was Mother Teresa as a Catholic nun who was very much used as a national symbol, and it's still used and present in the public sphere. The younger generation is having another symbols of identification. Example, they choose Judist, Kosovar Judist, and women to represent themselves, or they find figures like Dua Lipa, this Kosovar singer. So they do find local figures, but in a more global and more balanced way. And the values they think of Europe, of course, they are ambiguous in terms of what Europe is offering, but they are somehow in the same trend. So I thought that Kosovo is one of the, let's say, linguistically speaking, the other in Europe, but this other is trying to be to use the global context to feel more belonging. And for example, when I was doing the research at that time, there were so many manifestations related to LGBTQs and the debate at that time. So when they were thinking of Europe, they would visualize these portraits. I think that in terms of belonging, some sort of complexities or complex, not complexity, but the sort of complex that someone has with identities among the youth, I think it was more. They had less burden. The sense of belonging was not similar to the previous generation.
Yeah. So now, obviously, I mean, based on what I'm from your writing, which is, of course, I definitely concur with that. So the youth are not necessarily, of course, they don't feel wedded. They're Muslims largely, but they don't feel wedded to Islam per se. They look at Europe as a liberal countries, democracies. They are attracted to the European culture. And so from their perspective, they see themselves, they can easily see themselves as a part and parcel of the European community. And of course, like indicated earlier, before there was visa liberalization, they've learned about Europe through social media. Now they have an opportunity actually to go to Europe and see for themselves exactly what is happening. From your experience, albeit this is quite a short period of time since the visa liberalization, do you see a change in attitude of the youth? That is, are there some, for example, who went to Europe and came back already and said, well, this is exactly what I think Europe is all about. I still feel discriminated against. I don't think I'm going to fit so easily in the European community. Have you get a sense of that? Albeit may very well be quite early at this stage.
That is something that I would be interested to come back to that question, but at least I can provide my perspective so far. So I think the question of Europe among Kosovar elites is something that comes and goes back. For example, the debate of sense of belonging and somehow blaming Europe, this not European institutions, but Europe as geographical area, the one to be blamed for disputing territory in Kosovo. And then this Europe who is not accepting Kosovo to become part of it, but still with a great sympathy towards EU acceleration. And nowadays, and it is related to the question of visa, but even before that, through the social media, we can see that, and this is something that I want to examine a bit further. We can see that there is some shift in discourses on how, at least they are demonstrating that on social media, how and what is being spoken about Europe. So the blaming and proudness are both present. And the question of religion, for example, when it appears, there is always some of the impressions like if Europe is mainly Christian, without exploring further that it has Protestants, it has Orthodox, Jews, and atheists, and so on and so forth. So I think on one of the visualization of Europe, which was in people's mind when they visit Europe symbolically, they can see that the heritage is much broader, more and more rich. In terms of disappointment, we would need more of a time, but these are mainly visits that are happening are in terms of tourism and somehow taking pictures and standing in front of the monuments, and then they will realize that indeed Europe is secular, but it's more rich as they would have expected. So if I see a change, I do see a change, and I do see a change in terms of how also the national leaders speak about Europe. And this is also kind of a surprising because it's very visible that we are talking about orientation of a nation between these two dichotomies, West and East, so Orient and Occident. It's still very, very present, despite what are the topics. Somehow, in Kosovo and sometimes in Albania, it's all about this division. So, if we have discourses that they want to show the Occidental part, or discourses that they want to highlight the Orient part, that illustrates that actually in Kosovo still that is debatable. We are still struggling, or national leaders are struggling to define between the two, and it is illustrated when the visa questions comes apart. It is very much illustrated when the question of religion comes to the table. So yeah,
what I see from my perspective, albeit perhaps it's not been spoken as much or has manifested itself in the street, in the culture, that is, there is this kind of as a conflict. That is, the youth in Kosovo have not fully, in my view, please correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, established complete and total Kosovar's identification. That is, I am born in Kosovo, I'm a Kosovar nationalist, and this is my country. That is a complete and full identification with the country and what the country stands for, politically, religiously, culturally, and otherwise. And then you have on the other side the attraction to Europe, and of course, how to the extent that the youth is aware about the conflict, quote unquote, between the European community and Kosovo in terms of the integration, what the European countries is expecting the Kosovo to do in order to come closer to the European standard, because from a European perspective, Kosovo has not made as yet their standard. Not to speak of the political obstacle that's preventing integration. To what extent the youth is in fact aware of the political dynamics between the two sides and how they're trying to situate themselves. That is, on the one hand, they are attracted, they want to go to Europe, they want to see Europe, they want to study in Europe. On the other hand, they still have their roots, families, all of that is in Kosovo. And their identity as Kosovar has not totally been formed, specifically because, Kosovo independence is country is extremely young, probably the youngest, I believe, in Europe. And so do you see that sort of conflict within the youth, or do you see it differently?
You really gave a good picture and helped me to guide you to this question. So I think Kosovo's case is quite unique because not only in terms of historically how the nation state has worked on, but in terms of how the locals and the international community have cooperated. For example, if we go back in 2010, just 2 years after Kosovo declared independence, we had this very famous national video, which was named Kosovo Young Europeans, and which aligned with this building the state from the scratch. And there was this video where it was realized by the government to promote this Kosovo's identity, exactly with what you mentioned with the youth. And in that video, beautifully, you would see some younger people taking puzzles and putting Kosovo on a map, which would normally the debate on the question of territory comes when we speak about nations. So they would putting the map, the yellow map and yellow puzzles within the Europe map and a sense of belonging, and it was transmitted to CNN. And in that particular video, and it had some lyrics in English, there were no religious figure presented, which aligned with Kosovo's secular constitution. So you would entirely see the youth. You would entirely see buildings there that would illustrate some, in terms of architecture, the Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman style, sorry, and it illustrates the communist part. But the youth in a very modern and so let's say cosmopolitan dresses, but there were no religious attachment. And within the normative regulation and constitutional laws, Kosovo is very, very, very heterogeneous and treats minorities as a communities, and most of the normative aspect was designed in a combination with local and international community, and they were keen to include the sense of belonging by different communities. So if we analyze how this use was exposed. So legally, it has a legislation which was designed very recently and by European experts and American experts together with local experts, including Marti Ahtisaari. And then you had, in a more in a demonstrative way, you had different buildings. You had, yes, there are scholars and there are journalists who mentioned the presence of mosques in Kosovo, but there's a lot of transformation in the public sphere with different buildings and not only with mosques. You can see that Pristina, and when you visit, it has transformed dramatically in terms of visualization. In terms of the symbols, they are ambiguous. So for the youth, they wouldn't be able rather to identify with a Kosovar hero like Adem Yashari, or to identify with a medieval figure like Skanderbeg or Mother Teresa, or then to go more recent debate this Kosovar famous singers or Judists. So and at the same time, they are living, the youth of Kosovo, and not only in Kosovo, we are living in a very sensitive political climate. We also we are living in a very polarized society, fragmented society, divided in different groups, and mainly into sometimes in two groups. And the youth in Kosovo has also this kind of a fear and burden because there is an expectation what side to take. And when you live in a small country and in a country that it's very much multi-shaped between local and international and this unique history, then it's much harder to take sides. So that makes the situation ambiguous. I think there is a lot of ambivalences in that, but generally speaking, the youth is very secular and is oriented in a very pro-European way. There is a shift sometimes by some leaders, but I don't think that still Kosovo is an example where you can say that within Europe you can mark a difference between this country who has a Muslim majority. And in addition to that, I think the burden for the youth, and not only the youth, is raised because currently the rise of nationalism in Europe has been demonstrated highly, and that makes difficulties to express the question of identity, who to belong, because we're having the debate about immigration, we're having the debate about war, so where to fit in. I don't know if I was long or we lost the track, but I was trying to
No. Actually, no, you
different...
did it. No, you hit it exactly right. I just wanted to, just along the line when you mentioned Europe becoming more nationalist in a sense, well, Kurti will, I've been following him carefully, studying his thought, his ideas, his political orientation, his aspiration for Kosovo and all of that. And he's becoming increasingly more appearing to be more nationalist, specifically in connection with when it comes to Serbia. The various things that he wants to do in relation to the northern, where the ethnic majority Serbs live. And do you feel that the youth is aware that is the government nationalist tendency? And to what extent is the youth is looking at that? And to what extent they feel that they should be part of this nationalism that the government is trying to sort of embed it into the system. Do you see it that way? And if you do, where do you see the youth? How the youth is dealing with this quote-unquote nationalist policies and tendencies of the government?
I think that what it characterized Albanians in Kosovo and Albanians in general, it was the promotion of a secular identity, sometimes almost in a sacred way. So there was no mosque or there was no church that would identify them, but it was this language that became the church and the mosque that identified them. And when Kosovars wanted to construct a state, then the question of language was mentioned, but it was replaced with the question of human rights. And if we analyze different leaders, for example, if we begin with Rugova, he had chosen a pacific approach, and in terms of identity, he was promoting somehow an identity that was fitting well with what Europeans wanted. So that he presented this, and actually it was mentioned by historians before, this Pelasgian Illyrian identity, and again in a very secular way. And then we have another team of people, national leaders, who would come from Uçaka, from KLA, and they excluded the Islamic identity, and they wanted to focus on having an independent state. In the beginning, it was looking to making Albania a greater Albania, but then later it changed because they knew it's not going to be possible. And the war ended with help of the international community. So the people that came to the power, they had their discourses. God bless America, God bless the international community and NATO. With always some sort of unconditional love, because of course, and especially towards the U.S. and towards Europe, because it was them who helped the conflict, the war end. So we were used to have this kind of a narratives that would thank the US and thank the EU for this support in building the state, building the police, helping the media develop. And this is why, actually, not to jump to another topic, this explains why sometimes the civil society and media in Kosovo are a bit different compared to the ones in the region, because it was they were built with the help of the national community and the political elite. They were aware of that. So the narrative of the war somehow calmed down, and now another government has to bring another narrative to claim that there is a difference between the past and the current, and especially relating to the war. So the war legacy is calmed down currently, and we have a different narrative. And I think this narrative is a bit ambivalent, because, and I think this is also something that I want to explore, and this is my research that I want to analyze. I think that the relation between the US and Kosovo is very special and very unique. And it has developed and has transformed. I want to know why. I want to know if it has changed, or is it changing because we have the rise of nationalism locally and internationally, or is it Kosovo capable of confronting the West without taking for granted how the state was constructed, how it was built? So I think for the moment I can say that it has shifted. So my hypothesis is that yes, it has shifted. I want to know, and I think it is a combination of showing some nationalism locally, showing and aligning that with the current nationalism that is rising in Europe, attempting to show sovereignty without having a full sovereignty, but this has it has changed only in terms of political communication. It has not changed the way, for example, internationally Kosovo and the US or the West cooperate. It has only, we see only a manifestation by some leaders, and then that is provoked also in reaction to social media. Like before 5 years ago, you would rarely find Kosovars speaking in public about NATO, anti-NATO or anti-Western. And now you have some voices that they attempt to bring that debate. And I'm still exploring. I want to know why, but these were my. So to some extent, yes, but I don't know to what extent.
So before I don't want to dwell a little bit on the relationship between Kosovo and the United States, as to to what extent is also it's different. Of course, it's different between Kosovo and the EU, and how the youth feel about it. But I want to just go back to the original question that I asked. That is, in terms of nationalism, to what extent the youth is affected by the nationalist tendency of the Cortes government. I mean, do you have a take on that?
Mm-hmm. To what extent it is affected, because they are demonstrating that on social media, on comments, they are demonstrating this. As I said, you wouldn't find some youth who would speak about NATO or the West in general in debates. Now, if they find a leader that brings up this question, then they are affected, and they will demonstrate that with discourses and their narratives.
So in this particular case, then, if they, let's say they are aware about the various conflicting issues between the EU today and the government of Cortes government, to the extent that the EU was forced to impose even some sanctions, because Prime Minister Cortes has not been cooperating with the EU, when in fact he seeks strongly, integration into the EU. But he's trying to have it in a way both ways. I want to integrate, but I'm also going to have to assert Kosovo's interests, Kosovo's nationalism. And you use the word confrontation with the West. That is, given that Kosovo is a very existence today, continue to depend, I think to a large extent, on European and American support in every which way you can imagine, politically, militarily, and otherwise. To what extent the youth is aware of the dynamics, that is, Kosovo's independence on the West, specifically the EU and the United States. And on the other hand, they are part and parcel of the nationalist movement to want to assert Kosovo's independence, albeit relies heavily on the support of these two major bodies, named the US and the EU.
I think with the upcoming elections, we will find more to what extent the youth have been affected. But I want to say that the sense of extension of affection of a leader, it's demonstrated with elections, of course, and I think like for journalists and for everyone, it's quite interesting to have a leader that is daring to, because we have to analyze also how arguments make sense to the youth. So for the youth, it's quite, let's say, cool to have a leader that is daring to say no, and is daring to say naive, and is daring to say, I have a different strategy. So it's difficult to understand how that affects them. Is it going to make them have more anger towards this naivety or of daring to say no to Europe, compared to before, that it was more of a yes, the EU saying, and the US is saying so we have to, these are our allies and these are our friends, we cannot do it differently. So, or is having a nationalist or populist effect that is making the youth liking this approach even more. So it is hard to say how it's shifting. This is something that is very much debated in a political sense. I can see that in the media. I can see that in a daily conversation. But I'm still afraid to see to what extent elections could bring an answer to that. But the point, another very important point, is that it's different when these narratives are being said. For example, if a certain leader uses this narrative in a local audience, they accept it differently. But we have to take in mind also the involvement of diaspora, like Albanians who live abroad. Might be that they might get more attracted to this dareness, that there is finally a leader that's saying no. So here we have to be a bit skeptical. So how does these narratives are affecting the youth here or the youth abroad? Because with the diaspora, we do see that there is a much more involvement in different projects with Kosovo. So I think it's very hard to say to what extent. We can say that it is debatable. It is a fearful situation. And yes, I can see also that here in DC that they are questioning if these narratives are changing the turmoil between the US and Kosovo, and not only because of the narratives, but because of the security aspects that have happened. So still,
But this,
we have
yeah,
to.
yeah. So, but this, let's call it putting quote the defiance of the government against various demand requirement that the EU wants the United States wants from Kosovo to do in order to advance the reconciliation process between Serbia and Kosovo, eventually leading to mutual recognition. So on the one hand, again, I'm focusing on the youth largely. On the one hand, there is, as you and I agree, there's tremendous pull. That is, the European has tremendous pull for the EU. There's a desire for them, for Albanian Kosovar youth to go to Europe, to study in Europe, to find job opportunities. On the other hand, are they aware, for example, of the dynamic, and to what extent? And there I have a government that is basically defying some of the EU's requirements and demands. And do they feel that there is a sort of, is it causing some impediments to their desire? That is, do they feel torn between what the government is doing and what their desire to be part and parcel of the European community in terms of integration? And so how do they, are they weighing this? Are they expressing this in social media? Are they more supportive of the government because, okay, we have a government that's daring, it is standing and saying no to the United States, no to the EU, albeit it depends so much on them. But on the other hand, it is, in my view, still delaying the integration process. In some form or another, it is delaying the integration process. Albeit the visa liberalization was a very significant movement. Do you see that unfolding in any way from your perspective?
Mm-hmm. I think that there are divisions, so there are different perspectives. There is a group of people who are liking this approach because it's different, it's new, it's refreshing. It's new, but at the same time, it re-brings the discussion about this blaming Europe before or blaming the West for what has gone through for Kosovo. And there's another group of people who are worried about this change in terms of torning people apart. So you have two groups and two sides. Then these two different groups then get fragmented and divided when also global topics appear. But the situation has worsened, I think, also with the way how Europe also treats Kosovo, because it has more given the stick rather than carrot. Although Kosovo, it has more Western donors, it was not equally treated compared to Serbia, for example, who has received both Western and non-Western donors, for example, like China donations. So the division grows when the sense of blaming comes up. I don't think there is just one group. I think there is a transformation of elites and transformation of opinions, but it's torn into two different groups, two different sides, and that sometimes it's hard to say if you can really get right situation through the social media, because they are mainly people who speak negatively, and the ones who are more objective, they not necessarily are more speaking, or they we don't have that answer for sure. And sometimes people in a political debate, for example, in plenary session and in the National Assembly, they are more aware and more sensitive of that. So there's a torn between the two groups.
Yeah,
Does that
you
make
mentioned,
sense?
yeah, yes, yeah, but you mentioned, blame Europe for this or that. What kind of a blame? That is, why do they hold European? Of course, the European approach right now in connection with the conflict between Kosovo and they have a different kind of consideration in terms of they feel very strongly they need to calm down the conflict between the two sides. They don't expect recognition and peace between the two sides, but they want to calm it down, given, of course, the uproar taking place in Europe, specifically in connection with the war in the Ukraine and all of that. And they want to minimize Russian interference to the extent possible. So they may be leaning a little bit more on Kosovo, a little bit, where they have more leverage to lean on Kosovo in order to calm the situation or advance it, along the, I'm sure you're aware of of course, the plan, the French government plan to reconcile between the two countries. So in that sense, yes, I think the European perhaps feel more, they feel more, not a political expediency, but practicality in terms of practical terms. Kosovo should fulfill, for example, certain commitment going back, say, to the municipalities association. That's Kosovo committed itself to do it 10 years ago, but that did not happen. So in one hand, you might say the European feel they have more leverage because they are the guarantor, ultimately guarantor of Kosovo security. The United States feel the same way about that. And so there is this kind of cleavage, this kind of conflict between the two sides. And Corti seem to be holding. So this is the overall picture in terms of the two sides, where it's going now. Of course, there's an election coming in February, and to see how the public is going to express itself when it comes to who is going to be next prime minister. Is it Kurti again? Because of his standing, because of his position on various issues, he would be respected and more admired and re-elected, or somebody else because the public is not as happy with the progress that's being made in connection with the integration with the EU, which is most Kosovars want to see happen. And again, bring it back to the youth in terms of, again, where the young people see themselves, because as I say, it's a period of transition. It's going to be transitional period going to happen now because of the election and because of the on and off process or negotiation between Kosovo and the EU. So where do you see that moving?
I'll just add something to the question of blaming. So to the question of blaming, I think the question of territory and sovereignty is something that pops up as a topic. The question that is the dispute between the Serbia and Kosovo that is not solved, and Kosovars feel that actually it is more Kosovo that is being blamed for the war rather than Serbia. So the peace and conflicts has not ended. In terms of question of identity, the idea of belonging, I think it's more question in regards to Kosovo rather than Serbia, for example. So there are various topics, and Kosovars have this feeling that the EU is giving them the stick and the carrot. And actually, we did this research with two of my colleagues, where we analyzed and we compared Albania, Serbia, and Kosovo in terms of donations and how the political will is going on, and why Serbia is more compliant with the political conditionality imposed by EU compared to Kosovo, and that illustrates that it's really important in terms of elections how the domestic topics also are important. For example, if the question of corruption comes to the table, then if it's that topic that is going to be brought and would be the main answer to respond to or to vote to, or is it a question of international topics and global experiences? So it's very, very tricky because Kosovo, and it's not only because of the current government, but with the creation of state building, has shown some good indications of democracy compared to Serbia or compared to Albania. But this is not a merit or a result to one government. This is a merit of different actors and different times. And using the card of corruption to continue a mandate, it's a very important local topic. So and how they perceive it is going to be interesting to know. So yeah.
No, just given the the concern about brain drains that has been taking place in Kosovo. Now that I'm going back, opportunity to go abroad. To what extent do you think Kurti has tried or been successful in trying to deal with the youth needs and requirements in terms of education, in terms of job opportunities? Has that been one of his? Because based on I'm reviewing and seeing, I don't see a concerted effort on the part of the government to advance the need, the aspiration, the desire of the Kosovar youth. Do you see that as I see it, there's not enough is being done? Or do you think the Kurdish government has done or doing enough to persuade the youth to stay in Kosovo, not leave and never come back? Do you see that happening? And to what extent the Kurdish government has been successful, if any?
So I think most of my work has focused on the question of religion and identities of belonging, and I had also to go through discourses and narratives by different leaders. So I could give more of an answer which is not well explored, so it is just an opinion, without in terms of as a scholar, I don't have yet some data to answer to that. But the question of migration in Kosovo is a bit how to say not clear, because the question of and it's really important, the momentum. So given that Kosovo gained the visa liberalization, the question of moving and leaving Kosovo, it has transformed as a debate, because it has focused on they are moving but not necessarily leaving, the idea of free movement. Then with the incorporation of diaspora, we don't know, it is not clear if we are the people, the Kosovars who've left Kosovo not necessarily are detached from Kosovo, because they are given the contribution from diaspora, both economically but also this mandate of Kurti politically, so they are more present. And in terms of how it is used, the question of gaining votes and what is the topic that is alluring the people, I think the question of corruption and change. The change was the main aspect that made people vote, because it was about having a new government, and the main argument was the question of corruption. But that's now, it's done, because they had a mandate and they managed to prove it. What is going to be the upcoming narrative? It is a bit unclear. For example, I've seen it that in the National Assembly of Kosovo, they played, for example, during the Independence Day, the government decided to play a very popular song that sings the war and Kosovar heroes in an assembly that has a different community. And then I looked how it is questioned. So it was not much debated in the media of whether having the song played in a parliament is something to be questioned. And as I told you, I focused more on the question of how how the question of religion was brought here is also ambivalent. So on one hand, it is the secular country that is brought as an argument, as a main argument to Kosovo, but then sometimes it is mixed when it comes to wearing of the veil or having the ezan in the background. Some leaders, and including the prime minister, he would stop to hear the ezan. So it is a bit ambivalent, and it is that makes the situation more difficult to give answers, because this blurriness then makes it difficult to say what is the main thing that the current government is promoting. Is it the question of corruption? Is it the question of this dichotomy east-west? Is it the question of having a youth, a new government? So I do not yet see what is the main argument that they are promoting, because it used to be the change, and but now is a bit ambiguous and not clear.
Yeah, and it's specifically now that the government, obviously is running again, is trying to win again, and there are tens of thousands of youth who come of age and they can vote. So are you discerning any specific effort on the part of the government to attract these young people to vote for the government? I mean, you mentioned the word corruption. Obviously, the government has not been effective all those years to really effectively weed out, not eliminate, that's very, very difficult, but certainly address the question of corruption more seriously and show some result. Little bit has been done about that, but not adopting enough has been done about it. In addition to some other problems of the issues. But again, my reason I'm concentrating on the youth, because to me, being a young country, Kosovo as it is, it's a future, very future, depends on the current generation of youth. Those who just come of age, the age 18 and more, and what they do, what they think, how they go about. Surely they are not uniformity of opinion and position and attitude between the youth themselves. But on the whole, as a body, this is where Kosovo's future lies. What are being told, how they're being directed, how they indoctrinated for the future, what they're being, so this is their formative political position they're going to be taking in the end. And so there is that pull and push that you are talking about. This is constant. Mm-hmm. Do you discern in any event a specific trend? Where are they moving? In which direction they are moving? Or you don't see any discernible trend? Now again, given because of one's future, it depends on what these young men and women are going to do for the next 15, 20 years.
I think it is a bit concerning where is directing, and this is something that has to be very much answered, because if Kosovo is aligning with some of the European countries towards nationalism and banal nationalism, for Kosovo it would be even worse, because of the capacities and because of the situation, and because whatever happens with Kosovo, it's always the question of statehood that is questionable compared to, for example, Serbia. So if there would be a rise of nationalism, then that question would be more difficult for Kosovo. In terms of how it is shifting, I think that, for example, some of the arguments that the current government has used, and that was also difficult to explore it. For example, if before the previous government, fascist government, would mention the question of the Western and the question of EU in a different way, then the shift that happened with Kurti and also with current American leaders needs to be explored, and I'm still struggling to give an answer to that. But I know that the question, for example, of Renaissance sometimes comes to the arguments of Kurti, of Albanian Renaissance, which would makes the situation even more troubling, because if we are going to mention Albanian Renaissance, then we are rebringing the question of Albanian identity. We are rebringing the question of Kosovar identity, or Kosovar state, not Kosovar identity, but Kosovar state, because this doesn't orient towards the future. And I think one of the troubles that is currently causing that with these discourses of anti-NATO, anti-US, or questioning the previous government with a war legacy, it creates really strong divisions within Kosovo. And that is illustrated sometimes also with some political movements, because then we don't know if it's this coming from Kosovo leaders itself or are other agendas, because some reports suggest that usually in order to portray Kosovo as insecure or securely unstable, they would bring this tensions that, or they would mention as a fake narratives, the question between the Serbs and Kosovo in terms of cooperation and peace and reconciliation, and they would make Kosovo look as trying to make an Albanian greater state, rather and as consolidating the state itself, as it has been the aim of the state. So it is concerning, but I am a bit hesitant to know towards what direction. I'm afraid it will lead towards nationalism, but I don't know yet, and I want to examine. I want to speak with different and people, including you, to know. Is it a situation that we should be worried? Kosovo should be worried, or is it a situation that is just showing a standing compared to before? What is it? So I still.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, my final point I'd like to make, there is it's a predicament, of course, that Kosovo has, this government, future government, and that is, on the one hand, there is dependence on the EU, dependence on the United States. And when you depend on other power in fact, for their very existence, not economically, but in terms of security, when you depend on other power at your infancy as a country, only a decade and a half old, and that dependence inadvertently impact a country which is an infant country, it's a young country, impacts how its identity is being developed. That is, that dependency impact on the country's identity, the evolution of its own identity. And that is, I think, the conflict that the Kosovars will have to live with for a while until they get a sort of quote-unquote maturity. But that kind of maturity, that is, if there's going to be a picture what Kosovo is going to be 20 years from today, how it's going to look like, that given current almost total dependence on the West for its very own survival. And so compromises would have to be made along the line in order to maintain that kind of close relationship between Kosovo and the West. And that is obviously going to impact on how the identity of a young country is going to be shaped for the next 2 or 3 decades. And that is why, from my perspective, to me, that is going to impact the youth today more than any other segment of the population, and how that is going to evolve and how that's going to manifest itself a generation from today. Of course, it's perhaps anybody's guess, but it's inevitable in terms of how European and the United States will eventually shape, at least to some extent, the Kosovo's identity as such. Do you agree with the premise?
I agree in many, and the way you put it, I was just visually confirming, saying yes to what you were mentioning. I just want to say that I think the confronting part, or let's say this kind of a relation with the U.S. and Kosovo is like any relation that it evolves and transforms, and so this unconditional love between the two, which is not unconditional love, but I'm just trying symbolically to say it. So it has been grounded, it has developed, and now it has arrived to a certain point that from both sides, if the US wants something to their partner, the way they are saying it and demonstrating it publicly, it is not as soft as it used to be. So this combination between military and soft power is demonstrated differently. But also the response from Kosovo's leaders is not very mature, because if it's a very strong bond, and if it's a relation that needs to be fed, then this reaction has to be differently, given of what you've mentioned, this dependency in various forms. And now it has arrived to a certain point that using this very important topic between the US and Kosovo to lure the constituencies is not right, because the crucial narrative to Kosovo was not the anti-Western, or because it's not the same if Kosovo say or if the Europe says it. It's completely different. So if this narrative it's working instead of the multi-culti narrative, which was supposed to work for Kosovo, then it's going to be a clash, and this makes us as a scholars, as a researchers, difficult to find it, because we are just worried if it's going to align with the rise of nationalism. We are worried about the upcoming elections. But this topic, the relation with the US and Kosovo, should not be used as a topic to gain votes, because if it's used, then maybe that would answer to your previous questions. Then for a futurist term and for the youth and for the people, it's very problematic, because it's dividing the society. I mean, compared to Serbia, we don't have somehow a scenario where we can say, well, we can align with this country. For Kosovo, it was always clear, aligning with the West. So we do not have any other card to say for the EU. Well, if you don't help us, we have this ally. So it makes the situation to be worried.
Yeah, I mean, again, any dependency of necessity requires some certain compromises for a relationship to be maintained and strengthened. I think Kosovo was still, of course, in the early stages of learning how to navigate in the sea of contradiction that exists today in Europe and become an integral part of it, remain a whole. As the people and the government like to see Kosovo remaining. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate your insight, needless to say. And I hope we continue perhaps this discussion in person when I'm next in DC.
Thank you so much, and thank you for making my arguments in a more sophisticated way from your side, and it was very interesting to hear. Thank you so much, and looking forward to meet you in person. Thank you so much.
That'll be my pleasure. Thank you for listening to this episode on the issues. You can find this podcast on my SoundCloud page, and stay tuned to my social media accounts for the latest analysis and announcements.